This investigation is about one decision that has already been made somewhere above our heads, about a choice that was never debated in any referendum or any parliament, yet whose terms are so deeply embedded in the architecture of our daily lives that we have stopped noticing them. About the fragile thread on which everything you call your normal life is hanging, your bank account, the medicine in your refrigerator, the voice of someone you love at the other end of the line. This is not a story about someone else's disasters. This is a story about your dependency, one no one has ever shown you at its true scale. What is at stake is an entire model of existence. Modern people live under the illusion that their money is kept in a bank, their data is in the cloud, and their lives are in their own hands. In reality, all of this consists of records on servers connected to one another by glass threads the width of a garden hose, lying on the ocean floor without a single guard. One expertly planted line of code, or one act of sabotage at the right depth, is enough to silence our digital civilization. The experts trusted by the leadership of the world's largest economies describe such a scenario as inevitable, not hypothetical. They have already rehearsed it, at closed exercises, in sterile conference halls, while watching visualizations of viral maps sweeping across continents faster than any epidemic in history. Someone already knows the premiere date. The only question is, what will you do 72 hours after the network indicator goes dark? Now ask yourself honestly, what are you prepared to give up in exchange for the return of light, warmth, and a working ATM? Your passport, tied to every step you take online? Your savings, converted into a currency with an expiration date? The freedom to make decisions outside an algorithm's field of view? Listen, this investigation is about that price. Imagine a frozen world. The screen shows 10:00 Greenwich time, and there is no connection. The departure board at London's Heathrow Airport stopped mid-update. Not a single flight shows a status. The hands seemingly halted along with the network. In the tunnels of the Tokyo Metro, trains locked between stations. The traffic management system lost contact with control centers, and carriage doors closed halfway to the platforms. At the Wall Street docks, cargo cranes hung over containers that no one was left to order unloaded. A rising low-frequency hum from overloaded transformers reached its limit and was cut off by dead silence. This is not a Hollywood blockbuster script, not the fantasy of writers chasing a spectacular image. This is a mathematical inevitability built into the very architecture of our world, into those invisible decisions about convenience and connectivity made over decades without a single thought about the consequences. Pick up your smartphone right now. Look at it closely, this rectangle of glass, plastic, and rare earth metals. The moment the global network goes dark, it becomes dead weight. The question is not that you will be left without news or entertainment. You will be bankrupt in the literal sense because your money is not banknotes in a wallet or bullion in a safe. Your money is a record in a cloud database that has just stopped responding to requests. Your navigator will not guide you out of the city because maps no longer load. An ambulance will not receive your call because emergency call routing runs through the same digital nodes as streaming video. The smart lock on your door may not even open. It is waiting for confirmation from a server that no longer exists. Modern people without access to a server are a biologically vulnerable species stripped of the means to survive. And no one thinks about this while the battery indicator on the screen is still green. No one thinks about it while someone at this very moment is studying exactly where to sever the thread on which our entire world depends. In the next hour, we will open the dossier of what professionals call the digital Pearl Harbor. We will analyze the technical protocols of the Cyber Polygon exercises that world elites conduct in closed conference halls. And we will show the map of the minefield we all live on without suspecting it. You will see the architecture of a possible collapse through the eyes of a professional cybersecurity auditor, a person who knows the switch exists and someone's hand is already resting on it. The question is not whether this will happen. The question is different. What will you do hours after the silence begins? Let us move to Davos, Switzerland. In the corridors of the World Economic Forum, the air is thick not only with expensive perfume, it is thick with anxiety that expensive suits cannot conceal. A security auditor observing this scene reads it not as a social reception, but as a pre-war briefing. On the enormous screens in the conference hall, instead of the customary profit growth charts, there is a real-time visualization of a viral cyber attack. Red dots of infected nodes flare up on a world map in geometric progression, sweeping across continents faster than any biological infection has spread in history. From the podium come words that most news agencies let slip by, but which made every professional in the room recoil inwardly. Jeremy Jurgens, managing director of the forum, stated with alarming frankness back in 2000, a coming cyber crisis will be so significant that COVID deviatnats will pale in comparison as a minor inconvenience. Note, this is not an amateur futurist speaking, not a conspiracy blogger. This is a person with access to the analytics of the world's largest intelligence agencies and corporations. He is not speculating. He is stating a fact known to him from sources close to everyone else. Jurgens' words were spoken in Duentesici Devotsit. In parallel, a closed simulation of exactly this scenario was underway. Who among those present already knew the premiere date? To understand this, we first need to shed several persistent illusions. First of all, forget the image of a teenage hacker in a dark basement. We are talking about an industry in which the concept of zero-day, a zero-day vulnerability, is the most expensive commodity on the planet. This is a flaw in software code whose very existence the developer has not yet discovered, but which an attacker has already found, and for which they have already written an exploit. On the black market for cyber weapons, one such iOS hacking tool costs up to $2.5 million, and it is not teenagers buying these lots. They are acquired by state intelligence agencies that then see no rush to close the discovered holes. They stockpile them, accumulating them like weapons-grade uranium, waiting for hour X, when the accumulated vulnerabilities will be deployed as precision digital weapons. This is precisely the scenario drilled at the annual Cyber Polygon exercises. And this is not simply IT training, not a corporate seminar. It is a full-scale simulation of supply chain collapse in which such dissimilar players as Visa, IBM, and Russia's Sberbank work at the same table. They are all jointly practicing response protocols for a situation in which trusted communications channels have been destroyed. For a security auditor, the very presence of such varied participants at a single exercise is a sure sign that the threat is regarded as systemic, cross-border, and absolutely real. Here, an experienced investigator is obliged to ask an uncomfortable question. In October 2019, the same participants conducted exercise 201, in which they simulated a coronavirus outbreak, ran protocols, played through scenarios, recorded results. Exactly 2 months later, the world was plunged into the real COVID-19 pandemic, whose scenario matched the parameters of the exercise down to alarming details. Coincidence? In the age of big data and strategic planning at the level of transnational organizations, only amateurs believe in coincidences. An exercise of this scale is always a rehearsal of a production whose premiere date has already been set. A security auditor sees here the classic blueprint for preparation for managed chaos. If you know where the single point of failure is located, the node whose shutdown will bring down the entire system, you control the situation. The Cyber Polygon exercises focus precisely on this, the rupture of digital logistics. Imagine that the servers responsible for routing cargo simply froze. Trucks stop on highways. Ships are not unloaded at ports. Store shelves empty within 3 days. For this, no bombing is needed, just a few lines of malicious code inserted in the right place at the right moment. We observe a paradox sewn into the very fabric of the modern world. The more perfect our defenses, the more tightly we are connected, the more vulnerable we become. Globalization created a system in which everything depends on everything. A software update error in Texas can, within 15 minutes, shut down MRI machines in a Berlin hospital or halt the assembly line at an auto plant in Togliatti. Specialists call this the cascade effect. The planet's infrastructure is stretched taut as a string, and the exercises show us exactly where this string must snap to produce maximum resonance. Why would anyone want to destroy the world economy? An investigator always seeks motive. In expert circles, the term Great Reset sounds ever more insistently. The current financial system is burdened with debts that mathematically cannot be repaid and that demand a write-off. A cyber attack on a global scale is the ideal force majeure. It will write off all debts, destroy old financial obligations, and allow new rules of the game to be introduced. For instance, digital currencies with full issuer control that cannot be withdrawn at an ATM, and that carry expiration dates and geographic restrictions. The visualizations on the Davos screens leave no room for optimism. They show how an attack on one major provider instantly infects thousands of client companies throughout the chain. This is called a supply chain attack. The adversary does not need to hack every computer in your office one by one. It suffices to poison the well from which everyone drinks. Poison one Windows update or a popular antivirus, and millions of machines will open every door to the attacker themselves, having accepted the malicious code as a legitimate security patch. The evidence is already on the table. Motive, economic reset. Means, accumulated zero-day vulnerabilities. Opportunity, years of catastrophe rehearsal under the guise of exercises, just as happened before the real pandemic. The central question we must pose to ourselves right now sounds frightfully simple. If exercise Davos Den predicted a viral pandemic, accurate to within 2 months, what exactly does Cyber Polygon predict for our immediate future? The timer is already running. But to understand who is rehearsing and with what exactly, we need to understand the weapon itself. And this weapon is for sale, at an auction where there are no names and no receipts. Look at this monitor. Before you is a map of global network traffic in real time. Green lines pulse, displaying the movement of data between continents. This is the heartbeat of the digital economy. But the security auditor watching this rhythm from his seat is not looking for signs of life. He is looking for the anomaly, those harbingers of catastrophe invisible to the unprofessional eye. The most frightening discovery in this profession is understanding that to destroy the entire complex ecosystem, you do not need an armada of hackers. One error suffices. In the place where everyone trusts absolutely and no one checks. In professional circles, this is called a supply chain attack. Imagine, you live in a completely impregnable fortress where the walls are high, the guard never sleeps, and the gates are bolted. Every morning a water carrier arrives whom you have known for 10 years and whose barrel contents you have never thought to check. And then one day the enemy does not storm your walls. He simply poisons the well from which the water carrier draws his water. In the digital world, the role of the water carrier is played by an official software update. We open the door ourselves, grant administrative rights, and wait for improvements, only to receive a Trojan horse. This very paradox of trust generates what a security auditor calls the domino effect in global infrastructure. We are accustomed to thinking of the internet as a chaotic, decentralized network of billions of independent nodes where the failure of one element does not affect the others. This is an illusion and a dangerous one. Real modern infrastructure is a rigid hierarchy in which millions depend on a handful. One line of erroneous code written by an overtired programmer in Austin, Texas, can within 15 minutes shut down life support systems in a Berlin clinic. Distance no longer matters, only connectivity does. Theory is one thing, but red teams leave real evidence in the archives, and it has long been sitting on the table. In 2020, the SolarWinds incident occurred, a classic digital Pearl Harbor that most people simply did not notice. Malicious code was inserted not directly into the victim's computers, but one level higher, into an update for the Orion monitoring platform. More than 18,000 organizations, including the Pentagon, the U.S. State Department, and the country's nuclear laboratories, downloaded this virus themselves, sincerely believing they were installing a legitimate security patch. The attackers spent 8 months inside the most protected networks on the planet, remaining completely invisible, reading correspondence, copying documents, mapping the infrastructure. If SolarWinds was a quiet intelligence operation, the events of July 2024 showed us the face of a genuine apocalypse. The CrowdStrike incident became a textbook example of how fragile our reality is. An error in a configuration file for a security system driver, a file weighing just 40 kilobytes, triggered a cascading failure. 8.5 million Windows devices simultaneously went into reboot loops around the world, displaying the notorious blue screen of death, BSOD. The consequences of that morning required no special effects to be credible. 5,000 flights were canceled. In Indian airports, boarding passes were filled in by hand, as in the 1970s. In the United Kingdom, scheduled surgical operations ceased. Doctors were physically unable to open patients' electronic records. Australian banks, American television channels, everything ground to a halt. And note the critical point. This was not a cyber war, not a coordinated attack by a hostile state. This was simply an error, simply negligence. CrowdStrike, one drowsy programmer, one 40-kilobyte file. Now imagine that in place of this defective configuration file was a combat wiper virus, erasing data irrecoverably, with no possibility of restoration. When analyzing incidents of this kind, the security auditor invariably recalls the work of Soviet academician Viktor Mikhailovich Glushkov, a pioneer of cybernetics who formulated a warning half a century ago whose relevance has only grown since. The controllability of a system falls as its complexity grows. Today we have created a monster of complexity that cannot possibly be managed manually under any circumstances, and we have fallen into the trap specialists call a single point of failure. Look at the statistics of the global cloud market. 3 giants, Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, control 66% of all global cloud infrastructure. 2/3 of the digital world lies in 3 baskets, and this is frightening mathematics with unambiguous consequences. If a coordinated attack analogous to the Cyber Polygon scenarios were to knock out the data centers of even one of these providers tomorrow, the effect would be comparable to an asteroid strike. Companies that consider themselves independent and protected would suddenly discover that their servers, corporate email, and accounting systems were physically hosted on that same fallen cloud as the servers of some online game. Globalization has erased the watertight bulkheads in our ship's hold. A breach in one compartment sinks the entire vessel. You might ask, surely engineers understand this. They understand it perfectly. But in the contest between economic efficiency and security, efficiency won. Duplicating systems is expensive. Maintaining one's own server infrastructure is cumbersome. And renting cloud capacity is fast, convenient, and cheap. We traded sovereignty for a subscription. And now, when the screen in the control tower dispatch room flashes red, we recognize the price of that convenience. The system worked quickly and cheaply, right up to the first serious storm. And the storm, by all appearances, is already on the horizon. We have examined how software code can stop life on the planet, But the internet has another dimension, a physical one that we prefer not to think about while the Wi-Fi icon glows in the corner of our screen. We call the network the cloud, and this is the most damaging metaphor of our century, because there is no cloud. There are only other people's computers and thousands of kilometers of cables lying in cold mud on the ocean floor. Code can be rewritten. A cable can simply be cut. Forget for a moment everything you have heard about hackers breaking firewalls from dark basements. In reality, the threat looks quite different. Marketers spent decades selling us the beautiful cloud metaphor, suggesting that our data floats somewhere in the heavens, free from physical constraints. A backbone network engineer watching the monitors in a traffic management center will give only a bitter smile at this image. He knows the truth. The internet is a heavy, dirty, and incredibly vulnerable industry, no different in physical nature from an oil pipeline or a high-voltage power line. Mentally transport yourself to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Imagine the beam of a deep-sea submersible searchlight cutting through the eternal darkness at a depth of 4 kilometers. What does it illuminate on the seafloor? Not mythical creatures, not shipwrecks, a thin black thread covered with a layer of silk, lying directly on the bottom, completely defenseless against any intervention. That is your internet. That is the entire world economy. The fiber optic cable through which trillions of dollars fly every second and the fates of nations are decided looks disconcertingly pathetic. Many have fallen victim to the satellite communications illusion. Elon Musk and his Starlink have created a beautiful picture of the future, internet from any point on the planet via orbital satellites. But physics cannot be deceived. 99% of all international internet traffic travels along ocean floors because satellites are simply incapable of transmitting the volume of data that modern humanity generates. Our entire digital civilization hangs literally by a thread, more precisely, by a glass filament no thicker than a human hair, sealed in a protective polyethylene sheath. The paradox that keeps military strategists awake at night lies in the physical fragility of this system. The diameter of a deep-sea cable often does not exceed the thickness of an ordinary garden hose. Near shores, they are armored with steel braiding, but at depth, it is simply polyethylene and glass fiber. The thickness of a garden hose, that is all that separates you from losing all your money, all connectivity, and access to emergency services. And this hose lies on the ocean floor without a single guard. Any competent engineer will confirm a frightening fact. To halt globalization, you do not need a supercomputer, an anchor dropped carelessly from a merchant vessel, or a deliberate act will suffice. History has already shown us a dress rehearsal of the end of the world in miniature. In October 2020, the residents of the Scottish Islands were suddenly thrown back a century. The cable connecting them to the mainland was severed. This was not simply an internet outage. Cash registers in shops stopped working. ATMs produced only error messages, and most terrifying of all, connection to emergency services was cut off. People could not summon the police or an ambulance. The island sank into an information coma that in any emergency could have cost lives. Now scale this incident to the entire world. Look at the map of undersea communications, and you will see what are called bottlenecks, places where geographic conditions force dozens of cables to lie side by side on a small section of the seafloor. The Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca. Military analysts call these points geographies of vulnerability. Sabotage at these locations would split the global internet into isolated islands within minutes. It is here that a new class of strategic weapons steps onto the historical stage. Western intelligence services watch with unconcealed concern the movements of Russian oceanographic vessels, in particular the vessel Yantar. Officially, it is a scientific research ship, but its equipment with deep-sea vehicles capable of operating at the critical depths near cable infrastructure gives it the capacity both to tap a backbone cable and to physically disable it. This capability is the modern nuclear briefcase, except that instead of a missile launch button, here there are hydraulic cutting claws of a manipulator arm working at depths of several kilometers. You may object, so they cut the cable, they will repair it. This is the core misconception. Repairing a deep-sea backbone is not calling a handyman with a toolbox. It is an extremely complex maritime operation requiring specialized cable-laying vessels, of which only a handful exist in the entire world. In a stormy ocean in winter, just locating the damaged section and splicing the optical fibers can take several weeks. Imagine a world in which the banking system is stopped not for an hour, not for a day, for 3 weeks. That is no longer a crisis. It is the collapse of civilization in its current form. We built an economy based on the speed of light. High-frequency trading algorithms on exchanges earn millions on differences of milliseconds, the time it takes for a signal to travel from New York to London. The severing of even one backbone cable will force traffic onto longer backup routes, increasing signal latency. For you, this is only a slightly slower loading video. For financial robots, this is a signal for panic and the automatic dumping of assets. Markets will collapse before you can refresh the news page. The most tragic aspect of this scenario is the practical impossibility of full protection. The total length of undersea cables exceeds 1,300,000 kilometers, 3 times the distance from Earth to the Moon. No navy in the world is capable of guarding every meter of this route. We created the planet's circulatory system, placed it beyond any protected zone, laid it on the ocean floor, and left it unguarded. Any power possessing a submarine fleet holds the world economy by the throat. Digital apocalypse can arrive without a single line of malicious code. The global network is only as strong as its weakest physical node. But if cables are the veins through which information flows, what is the blood of this system? Money, of course. And once the veins are severed, your savings become a digital ghost. The moment the last pulse of light dies in a severed transatlantic cable, on the other end of that wire, in the trading halls of New York and London, there arrives not silence, but uncontrollable chaos. For the security auditor watching from the command post, what is happening looks like the cardiogram of cardiac arrest. The price charts, pulsing with life just a second ago, freeze or break off in a vertical red line. It happens instantaneously because the modern financial system does not merely depend on network connectivity, it is connectivity embodied in data streams. The moment the physical channel of information transmission is destroyed, the very concept of value loses all meaning. We must acknowledge an uncomfortable truth that the banking sector carefully conceals behind glossy apps and reassuring rhetoric. Your money does not physically exist. What you call your savings is not gold in a safe, not bundles of banknotes in a vault, not a physical asset you can hold in your hands. It is a record in a database, an electromagnetic trace on the hard drive of a server that may be located on another continent. While that server is online, you are a person of means. The moment the screens go dark, you become a creditor who cannot even prove the very existence of his debtor. You do not own money, you own the right to access information, a right you have just been deprived of. Watch the screens alongside our specialist. High-frequency trading algorithms, HFT systems, which account for the overwhelming share of global stock market turnover, are programmed to respond within microseconds. When signal latency begins to spike due to cable damage, the robots interpret this as a market anomaly, and their risk management protocols trigger synchronously across the globe. Sell everything immediately. This is not a decision made by a human. It is a mathematical inevitability hardwired into the algorithm. The market collapses into an abyss, not because the real economy has crashed, but because the machines have lost time synchronization. In professional circles, this is called a liquidity crisis. For an ordinary person, it means one thing: your assets are frozen. You stand at an ATM with your card in hand, the correct PIN entered, but the screen shows only an error connecting to the issuing bank. You cannot buy food, fill your car, pay for medicine. Money has lost its primary function, to serve as a medium of exchange, and has once again become an abstraction existing only in the imagination of those willing to believe in it. The financial system is the circulatory system of civilization, and we are watching as a clot in the main channel causes an ischemic stroke of the entire world economy. The scale of the catastrophe comes into sharper focus when you look at the statistics of the interbank SWIFT system. This network processes more than 42 million messages daily. These are not merely money transfers. They are nerve impulses confirming that grain has been shipped, oil has been paid for, wages have been credited. Disconnecting SWIFT for an entire country is often compared by experts to deploying financial nuclear weapons. In our scenario, the button is pressed not by a politician, it is pressed by a network failure. And without these messages, not a single bank will risk executing a single transaction, because it has no way to verify whether the counterparty at the other end of the wire is solvent. Optimists will say, banks have backup data, backup systems, recovery protocols. A security auditor will only smile bitterly at this. Yes, backups exist, but recovering a global bank's transactional database after a critical failure or a ransomware attack is a fundamentally different operation in complexity from recovering photos on a smartphone. We are talking about so-called cold recovery. To rule out errors and prevent funds from being stolen during the process, the system must be fully stopped, the integrity of every byte of data checked, and only then restarted. According to the regulations of the world's leading financial institutions, this procedure takes from 48 hours to 1 week. Reflect on this figure. 1 week, 7 days without access to bank accounts. In a world where all logistics operates on the just-in-time principle and stores carry no stockroom inventory, a week of financial paralysis is a death sentence for small and medium-sized business. But the most frightening revelation awaits depositors not in the queue at a closed ATM, but in the texts of laws they have never read. While servers undergo the recovery procedure, emergency protocols for rescuing the banking system come into force. The mechanism known as bail-in or internal rescue. This is a legal instrument adopted in most developed countries, including European Union states and the United States, after the 2050 crisis. It allows a bank on the edge of collapse to use depositors' funds for its own recapitalization. Put simply, your deposits can be forcibly converted into shares of a bank that is de facto already bankrupt. In conditions of a global digital failure, when depositor panic inevitably triggers mass withdrawal of funds, this mechanism becomes the only tool for keeping the system from complete disintegration. Your money will be confiscated to save the structure that was holding it. This changes the very nature of the concept of ownership. In a digital environment stripped of electricity and connectivity, it is not the one with a registry entry who controls the resource, but the one with physical control over the asset. The security auditor sees alerts on the monitors not only about falling asset prices, warnings light up about failures in energy resource payments. Tankers carrying oil and fuel oil stand at anchor off ports because letters of credit failed confirmation in automated systems. Power plants receive no payment guarantees for future gas deliveries. Financial paralysis begins killing the real sector directly through the rupture of logistics chains. We are accustomed to thinking of the economy as a complex science with many variables. In reality, it is based on simple collective belief. Belief that the numbers on the screen can be exchanged for bread, warmth, and safety. When the screens go dark, this belief evaporates instantly, giving way to what neurobiologists call the primordial threat to survival response. Financial paralysis does not merely freeze accounts, it stops the physical movement of matter in the real world. Tankers carrying fuel, oil, and coal stand at anchor because the digital signature on a letter of credit failed validation in an automated logistics system. Platforms block fuel shipments to power stations because the balance sheets of consumer enterprises show zero. At this moment, the backbone network engineer on duty in the dispatch center sees on the monitors what any power engineer considers a harbinger of catastrophe: the frequency of current in the network falling below 50 Hz. This is not merely a flickering light bulb. The power grid is a living organism in which electricity production must match consumption with perfect precision every millisecond. When there is no fuel, or when the management software complex fails, the turbine begins to slow its rotation. To protect expensive equipment from physical destruction due to vibration when synchronization is lost, the automation cuts generators one after another in order of priority. Entire districts on the dispatcher's map turn black. There is not simply no light there. There is nothing requiring electricity to operate. Blackout begins. But the darkness is only a visual effect. The real threat is invisible, and it has already entered the city's veins. We are accustomed to thinking of the switch as a physical lever on a wall. In the 21st century, the switch is a SCADA protocol, a supervisory control and data acquisition software complex that opens dam floodgates, regulates control rods in nuclear power plant reactors, distributes currents in the power grid. The problem is that the architecture of most of these systems was designed in the 1980s, and many of them still run on Windows Devanostopia or Windows XP connected to the internet for the convenience of remote administration. The engineer knows the bitter truth about how dangerous this is, and this is not a hypothesis. On December 23, 2015, the world witnessed the first confirmed successful cyber attack on critical energy infrastructure. The Sandworm Group hacked the operators of 3 energy companies in Ukraine. Dispatchers watched in real time as the cursor on their monitors began to move on its own, controlled by attackers thousands of kilometers away, and sequentially clicked the substation disconnection buttons. The hackers did not merely leave 200,000 people without electricity. They overwrote the firmware of converters, turning the equipment into useless heaps of metal, whose replacement was carried out manually over many subsequent months. The absence of light is only the prelude to the real catastrophe. The modern megacity is a desert into which water is delivered by force against gravity. Powerful electric pumps raise it to the upper floors of skyscrapers. The moment voltage disappears from the grid, pressure in the main water pipes begins to drop. According to water utility engineers' calculations, the critical threshold will be reached just 4 to 6 hours after the blackout begins. After this, taps on all floors of every building, starting from the upper ones, will run completely dry. Stop for a moment and absorb this fact fully. Your ability to quench your thirst depends on the operation of an electric pump controlled by a server on the other side of the city. If this fragility of our civilization frightens you, as it does me, and you want to explore the mechanics of this process more deeply, support this film with a like. It will help the algorithms show the truth to more people. And to not miss the detailed breakdown of how to protect yourself and your family in conditions of infrastructure collapse, subscribe to the channel. We will continue the investigation. The loss of pressure in water pipes carries a hidden biological threat that few people consider in the context of a power outage. Pipes are not hermetic in an absolute sense. While high pressure is maintained inside, water is pushed outward through microcracks, and no contaminants from outside can enter. But the moment pressure drops to zero, a back siphon effect occurs. Groundwater, often mixed with sewage effluent, begins to be drawn into the potable pipe through those same microgaps. When several days later an attempt is made to restore water supply, what flows from the taps will not be drinking water, but a toxic bacteriological cocktail, the scenario for an instant epidemic of cholera and dysentery in a city of millions. Simultaneously, a thermal catastrophe is unfolding. For residents of northern latitudes, Russia, Canada, Scandinavia, a power outage in winter means the death of the heating system. Circulation pumps in boiler rooms stop. The heat carrier ceases to circulate through radiators. Buildings of concrete and glass lose their stored heat at a catastrophic rate. Within 12 hours, the temperature in apartments will equalize with the outdoor temperature. If the water and heat carrier are not immediately drained from the heating systems, they will freeze, expand upon crystallization, and rupture the pipes, rendering a building uninhabitable even after power is restored. Look at this situation from the perspective of intensive care unit doctors. Hospitals are the last islands of light in a city plunged into darkness. Diesel generators switch on automatically when external power is cut, but their resource is strictly limited. A standard fuel reserve in a medical institution's tanks is calculated for 12, at best 24 hours of continuous operation. Fuel delivery logistics, as we have already established, are completely paralyzed. The backbone network engineer understands. The moment the diesel engine falls silent, ventilators, incubators for premature newborns, and life support monitors will go dark. Doctors will switch to manual ventilation using ambu bags, but there will not be enough hands for all patients. Cyber war does not kill with rockets and explosions. It kills with the silence of pumps and the cold of radiators. We have become hostages to our own technological evolution. We have built cities in which physical survival, without a constant inflow of gigawatts of energy and terabytes of data, is impossible. An elevator stuck between floors, an electronic lock that will not open without server connectivity, an electric stove on which you cannot boil water without voltage in the outlet. Familiar comforts become a trap, and a high-rise building without resources becomes a stone box, from which you need to flee, but there is nowhere to flee, because the situation outside the door is no better. The backbone network engineer watches as the last connectivity indicators to the backup center go dark on his control panel. The SCADA system is completely compromised. Malicious code that entered the system through what looked like a harmless driver update 6 months ago has activated on a built-in timer and has erased the control logic of the distribution networks. This is not a software error that a team of electricians with screwdrivers will fix. Before the backbone network engineer stands a problem that has no quick solution. The malicious code has burned the control logic of every distribution node in the network, and it can be restored in only one way: by physically reprogramming the controllers at each facility by hand. This is not a remote operation, not a reboot from a backup flash drive. A specialist must stand before a specific control cabinet and enter parameters from scratch. By the most optimistic estimates, the entire process will take no less than a week. But cities cannot afford to wait a week. Food supplies in network-connected refrigerators begin to spoil by the end of the first day, quietly, without warning, without status update messages. Sewage pumping stations deprived of power, overflow, and sewage begins to break through to the surface, first in basements, then on sidewalks. The sanitary situation deteriorates not linearly, but exponentially. The stench and filth are only the visible part of the catastrophe, the invisible part being the bacteria that have already begun their quiet war for territory. People who yesterday ordered food delivery with a single touch of the screen find themselves face to face with a reality in which drinking water is worth more than gold, and warmth matters more than any gadget, no matter what it costs. The illusion of safety dissolves along with the charge of the last battery. But in this dark and cold scenario, there is yet another dimension of catastrophe that most people overlook: the information vacuum. Without a working internet and television, you do not know what is happening beyond your block. A local transformer failure or the beginning of a war. Wait for help or leave. The unknown breeds monsters more terrifying than any real adversary. Rumors spread faster than any virus, and each successive retelling adds a new layer of horror. Neighbors who yesterday lent each other a pinch of salt today look at one another not as partners in the building, but as competitors in the struggle for the last remaining resources. Social bonds, accustomed to existing within the shell of digital interfaces, snap because the shell no longer exists. This is what the death of urban civilization looks like in offline mode. Not an instantaneous explosion, but a slow, agonizing suffocation of infrastructure. The security auditor, watching the cameras still powered by backup batteries, records how fear transforms into aggression. Not instantaneously, but with mathematical inevitability. The moment a city's life support fails, a countdown begins, not for technology, but for humanity itself. We enter the phase that sociologists call the dissolution of the social contract. And this dissolution occurs significantly faster than the concrete walls cool. There is an observation often attributed to analysts of British counterintelligence, though in essence it is a harsh sociological conclusion confirmed many times in practice. Every society is just 9 meals from anarchy. 9 missed breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. That is exactly 3 days, 72 hours, that separate a law-abiding taxpayer from a state in which he is ready to grab whatever he can and go take food by force. You may consider yourself a person with firm moral principles, but your hypothalamus holds a different view. Hunger is the most ancient biological imperative, capable of breaking through any cultural superstructure faster than any computing algorithm breaks a cipher. The problem is that the modern megacity is physically incapable of feeding itself beyond those 3 days, simply because it was never designed to. We live in the age of the just-in-time logistics concept. Your supermarkets are not warehouses with a month's supply, but showroom windows where products are delivered fresh every few hours. The U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, states this directly in its reports. Retail networks in major cities carry enough food for exactly 72 hours of normal consumption. Once panic sets in, this window shrinks to 6 hours. Shelves are emptied in literally minutes, and new trucks will not arrive because their navigation systems are dead, and gas station payment terminals do not work without network connectivity. This is not a theoretical assumption. The dress rehearsal for this chaos has already happened, and we have seen its results with our own eyes. In 2017, the NotPetya virus attack struck one of the world's largest logistics operators, and in a split second the company responsible for transporting 1/5 of all global cargo was completely blinded. Operators did not know where their ships were, and more terrifying still, did not know what was in the thousands of containers aboard those ships. The ports of New Jersey, Mumbai, and Rotterdam ground to a halt. Tens of thousands of trucks formed kilometer-long queues at terminal gates, because without a digital code, it was physically impossible to verify the right to collect cargo. That was an attack on one company, and it paralyzed the global supply chain. Now imagine the same scenario applied simultaneously to every company on the planet. Here the phenomenon that neurophysiologists call digital amnesia comes into full force. Over the past decade and a half, we have completely delegated the function of spatial orientation to satellite systems. Ambulance drivers, fire crews, police patrols, all of them are critically dependent on GPS and digital maps. Research unambiguously shows, without navigation, response time to an unfamiliar area increases 3 to 4 times. In conditions of blackout, when traffic lights are not working and streets are clogged with abandoned vehicles, this means in practice that help will not arrive at all. The emergency number, 112, is not magic redundancy. It is software call routing through digital nodes that no longer exist. No network, no rescue. In this silence is born the most dangerous enemy of order, the absence of any reliable information. When official channels fall silent, rumors immediately take their place, and crowd psychology functions as a resonator. The anxiety of one person, multiplied by collective uncertainty, transforms into mass hysteria. In the absence of police, which without communications cannot coordinate even its patrol vehicles, the state's monopoly on the use of force evaporates, and the street begins to live by the law of the strongest. This is not a metaphor for the Dark Ages. These are the Dark Ages in a backdrop of glass and concrete, where instead of candles there are draining phones, and instead of blacksmith tools there is whatever happened to be at hand. Particularly dangerous is the rupture of medical logistics chains. Insulin, dialysis drugs, cardiac medications. All of these require unbroken cold supply chains that are among the first to snap. Pharmacies are looted, not by addicts, but by people maddened with fear trying to save a loved one's life. The situation is aggravated by the fact that modern money without electricity becomes fiction. You cannot buy loyalty or safety with numbers on a frozen account. Barter is born. Batteries, antibiotics, drinking water become the new hard currency because their value does not depend on a server's operation. This is the collapse of the trust economy. The complex social bonds that allowed us to build skyscrapers and launch rockets snap, leaving us face to face with our animal nature. And this happens not a year after the catastrophe, but by the end of the first week. The paradox is that the very technologies created to unite people have made us totally dependent and helpless in isolation. We have forgotten how to negotiate without messaging apps and how to navigate by the stars. Authority, watching control slip through its fingers, arrives at the only possible step, a step that will forever change the architecture of the global network. If the internet has become the source of the infection that spread chaos across the world, it must be severed just as a surgeon severs a gangrene to save the organism whole. 30 meters below the surface of the city plunged into darkness, the air in the government situation center is sterile and cold. Generals and ministers, illuminated only by the emergency light of monitors, stare at a map that reddens with each passing second. More cities, more districts, more critical infrastructure facilities shifting to lost status. The decision made in these minutes has no precedent in history. To stop the spread of the digital infection that has seized the global network, one must sacrifice connectivity itself. The order is brief: isolation. For the backbone network engineer who receives this directive at the control panel, something occurs that only yesterday seemed like science fiction. The digital tourniquet protocol is activated. The logic here is medical, field grade. If a limb is shattered and infected, it is amputated to save the life. In the context of cyber war, this means a physical and logical severing of all connections to the outside world. The global internet, as humanity knew it over the course of decades, as a unified space without borders and without gatekeepers, ceases to exist. For years, we were told that the internet is an ephemeral cloud, fundamentally beyond state control. But the engineer looks not at marketing slides, but at the map of physical junctions and cross-border transit points. There are few of them, and at each one, equipment has been standing for years, waiting precisely for this moment. We are talking about Deep Packet Inspection, DPI. This system works like a digital customs checkpoint, capable of looking inside every transmitted byte of data. Unlike an ordinary firewall, which only looks at the sender's and recipient's address, DPI opens the envelope. If malicious code or a command from an external botnet command server is found inside, the packet is destroyed before it can reach its destination. This technology is what allows, in real time, the filtering of useful internal traffic from external viral load. And at the moment of activation, it transforms from an information control tool into a national security shield. Those who engaged in strategic planning in this area prepared for such a scenario for decades. China's Golden Shield Project and Russia's sovereign Runet law were long criticized as instruments for restricting freedom of speech, but now, when global routing protocols have been hacked and external channels carry exclusively viral load and disinformation, These architectures become the only functioning lifeline. They allow the creation of a closed circuit in which government services, banking transactions, and internal communications continue to function, even if the rest of the world is in flames. In 2009, Russia conducted a precedent-setting exercise involving the complete disconnection of its segment from the global network. The result was unambiguous. Internal traffic continued moving normally, transactions were processed, critical infrastructure retained its manageability. At the time, this was called a resilience test. The engineer standing at the control panel now understands it differently. It was a lifeboat inspection before the Titanic of globalization struck the iceberg. The engineer enters the command, and on the monitors, the graphs of external data exchange crash to zero. This looks like clinical death, but in reality, it is a transition to autonomous life support. The splinter net, the fractured network, becomes reality. The American segment separate, the Chinese segment separate, the Russian segment separate. Digital borders acquire the same impermeability as state borders with barbed wire. For the ordinary user, this is a shock. An attempt to access a website whose servers are located overseas yields only an endless loading screen. But local services come alive. Internal email, national payment systems, local messengers begin to work faster, freed from parasitic external traffic. The country transforms into a digital fortress with raised drawbridges. Isolation is the price for the return of manageability. The flip side of this coin, however, is no lighter than the disease itself. By severing the outside world, the state acquires an absolute monopoly on information within the perimeter. All traffic passes through controlled gateways. Every word and every byte is visible at a glance. Anonymity dies along with the global network. You are no longer a citizen of the world. You are a user of a local subnet with strictly prescribed access rights. The engineer watches the stabilizing indicators of the internal network. Lights begin to return to homes. The water utility receives commands to start the pumps. It seems the worst is behind us. But in this sterile silence of the closed internet arises a question more frightening than all the previous ones. Who exactly struck the blow that forced an entire country to wall itself off from the rest of the world? We have closed the doors, but the enemy may have remained inside. Or, what is even worse, the enemy may have deliberately herded us into this trap of isolation. For while we were building walls, someone was skillfully manipulating our fears. While we were searching for the culprit, authority was already making the decision about how to prevent a recurrence. And the price of that decision is your anonymity. Now, with the perimeter closed and the data hemorrhage stopped, the most complex phase of the operation begins. In the cyber forensics laboratory, specialists lean over the body of the virus, just as a pathologist leans over the body of a victim. Their task is to answer the single question that truly matters to history: who pulled the trigger? The security auditor stands in a sterile room where the monotonous hum of servers nearly drowns out his thoughts. And on the screens run lines of decompiled code, the very code that almost sent civilization back to the Stone Age. He looks at these lines not as mathematics, but as a crime scene strewn with evidence. Here is the file's compilation timestamp. It coincides with a working day in Beijing. Here are comments in the code. They are written in Farsi. It would seem the perpetrator has been found, that it is time to prepare a diplomatic note or plan a retaliatory strike. But the experienced professional only smiles at this naivete. In the world of high-level cyber espionage, the clue you find first is precisely what you were meant to find. This is not the criminal's mistake. It is his calling card, deliberately planted in the victim's pocket. The security auditor is confronted full-on by the fundamental problem of cyber war, known as the attribution problem. In classical forensics, a bullet extracted from a wall carries unique rifling marks linking it to a specific barrel. In digital space, the barrel is a software exploit that can be copied, purchased on the black market, or stolen from the archives of any intelligence agency in the world. If the attack was carried out using U.S. National Security Agency tools, this does not in any way mean Washington is behind it. It could have been a teenager from a Paris suburb who downloaded a leaked archive, or the military intelligence of a third country deliberately imitating American tradecraft. This phenomenon has received the name false flag. Elite-level hacking groups known as APTs deliberately embed fragments into code that mislead investigators. Moscow time zone in metadata, meaningless variables in Cyrillic, code architecture characteristic of Iranian operations. This is a digital theater of shadows where the sets change faster than investigators can document them. The auditor understands, the more obvious the trail, the higher the probability of staging. The perfect cybercrime is when the victim is not only robbed, but convinced they know exactly who is guilty, and begins a war against entirely the wrong adversary. History knows concrete examples in which an entire state stood behind digital chaos. The Lazarus Group, a group that most leading cybersecurity experts linked to North Korea, made a bold attempt to extract nearly $1 billion from the Central Bank of Bangladesh via the SWIFT system. For Pyongyang, this was not mere robbery. It was a way to replenish the state budget of a country strangled by sanctions, effectively turning hacking into an official branch of state revenue. But even where the evidence seemed obvious, investigators assembled the evidentiary basis over months, reconstructing transaction routes through compromised servers in neutral jurisdictions, literally bit by bit. Here the concept of cyber privateering steps onto the historical stage. Recall the corsairs of the 15th century, private captains who received from the crown a license to attack enemy vessels. Today, geopolitical players operate by the same scheme. A state hires criminal hacking syndicates to carry out operations it officially disavows. If the operation fails, the government will declare that these people are simply criminals with no connection to it. This is what strategists call plausible deniability. You cannot declare war on a nuclear power on the basis that a group of hackers, formerly unconnected to state structures, has brought down your power grid. The auditor continues to dig deeper into the attack architecture. The command servers controlling the botnet were located in Brazil, Estonia, and Vietnam. But these are merely proxy nodes, rented under assumed names for cryptocurrency. The real operator could have been in the next building or on another continent. This is fundamentally irrelevant. The modern network is a labyrinth of mirrors. A signal passes through dozens of jurisdictions in milliseconds, and obtaining judicial orders for server access in 50 countries simultaneously, fast enough to catch the criminal in the act, is legally and technically impossible. This very impunity makes cyber weapons the ideal instrument of modern warfare. They are cheap, anonymous, and carry destructive potential comparable to an aerial bombardment. But the auditor fears to voice aloud the hypothesis that strikes him as most frightening of all. What if the code he is now analyzing in the laboratory was written not by enemies? What if the back door through which the attack passed was left by software developers deliberately, at the request of intelligence agencies, in the name of protecting national interests, and was then stolen or turned against its own citizens? This paradox is known as the dual-use problem. Tools created for surveilling terrorists or for remote system administration inevitably become a vulnerability for everyone else. In the world of cybersecurity, an inviolable axiom applies. A backdoor for the good guys is a backdoor for everyone. If you leave a loophole for law enforcement, sooner or later organized crime will crawl through it. And this is not a matter of luck, it is a matter of time. The auditor notices in the code traces suspiciously resembling the standard update protocols of a popular antivirus. The attack may have passed from inside the trusted perimeter, using legitimate update channels as a transport shell for the virus. The conclusion of the investigation is bitter and uncomfortable for everyone. The evidence points simultaneously in three different directions, none of which is conclusive. Three different superpowers, three sets of contradictory trails, and before the auditor stands the digital fog of war in its absolute embodiment. The investigation reaches a dead end. The weapon has been found, the malicious code. The gap in the fence has been found, the zero-day vulnerability. But the one who held the knife remains unknown. You, as a citizen, demand that the enemy's name be named. You want to know whom to hate for a week without light and warmth. The honest answer from the expert sounds different. In the digital environment, absolute attribution is a luxury we cannot afford. What matters is not who launched the attack, but how to guarantee that it does not repeat. And for this, we must stop trusting anyone at all, in principle. The presumption of innocence in the network is dying. Its place is taken by the principle of zero trust. Nothing and no one is secure by default, neither inside a protected perimeter nor outside it. Whether we speak of an antivirus update or a data packet from a colleague, every element of the system is considered potentially compromised until proved otherwise. Please write in the comments how you found this investigation. I genuinely need to know whether it gripped you and whether it made you look at your own smartphone differently. What do you think? Is the security auditor from this story right when he calls on everyone to build a personal analog reserve? Paper books, practical skills, real-world connections, in case the network goes dark. And tell me, do you prefer to watch horizontal video or vertical for your phone?